Okay, well, we might get started. We've got a few that have come online and we're 5 minutes past 7. So welcome everybody to episode 4 of our 2020 series, The Year of Living Vicariously. Tonight's episode is titled Coping with Difficult Situations at Challenging Times. So whilst our 3 speakers will be talking about lots of different things in their presentations this evening, that was kind of our theme that was hanging it all together. Just a couple of housekeeping things that most of you would be aware of now, which is you're all on mute and we can't see you. But please tonight, what we'd like to do is use the chat function solely for any questions that you have coming in. So that way it's a little bit more interactive than the Q&A, because the Q&A function, you can't actually see the questions and comments that are coming in. So please use the chat function freely to be commenting as we're going through the evening, and to indeed ask questions of our panelists. So if you could keep that to all panelists and attendees in the little drop-down box for those that are listening in. So I'm going to hand over firstly to Paul Niven. Paul's joining us from China. Paul isn't joining us via video because of the stability of his connection and a few other challenges. So Paul will be speaking, and we do have some slides as well. So as he goes along, he's going to prompt me to put those slides up, and then we'll move through the evening. As usual, we'll be going for about an hour, slightly more if we've got some questions. Some of our speakers are able to stay. If you need to jump off at any time, please just send us a goodbye in the chat, and we really appreciate you coming online. So Paul Niven, if I could hand over to you. Thanks very much.
All right, look, thank you very much for the invitation to join. And as many of us in rural areas know, we spend a lot of time on telephone conferences and video chats, but this year has absolutely blown that out of the water. So I'm now quite sure many of you are quite, I suppose, literate in using all these tools and functions. Zoom, a word that nobody knew about 8 months ago, is now, you know, part of our common vocabulary. So anyway, look, without further ado, there's probably, well, there will be 3 topics I'm going to cover this evening or this morning, depending on where you are. And the first one is about what I did as part of my Nuffield scholarship. The second one is about what I do now. And then the third one is about how we managed through and played out with COVID here in China. Before I kick off, I'll just give a little bit of background on myself. I'm an Australian, and I think I'm 46. Anyway, something like that. I did my Nuffield scholarship in 2015, and at the time I was working at the Van Diemen's Land Company in Tasmania. And that at the time, and still is, Australia's largest corporate dairy farmer that had 25 farms and 20,000 milking cows. I have quite an interesting background. I come from probably, I think on one family side, I'm 5th, and on the other side, I'm 6th generation farmer from central New South Wales. My parents met because my grandfathers sold pigs to each other. But after finishing high school, I went to vet science, studied vet science at the University of Sydney. And then I completed a master's degree down at the University of Melbourne with a group called the McKinnon Project in cattle and sheep production systems. And then I lived in the UK for a while, and then I moved back to Australia, and I worked in animal health. I'm working for Cooper's Animal Health. Some of you will know that as manufacturers of dips and drenches and other products for cattle and sheep. And then I spent a 4-year period completely outside agriculture, where I worked as a business improvement consultant. And in that time, that then helped me develop skills, and some of you will have heard the words like lean manufacturing and things like that, that then allowed me to come back to VDL and look at a business that had 25 farms, not just as a farming business, but as basically an organization where we're managing processes and structures and ensuring that work gets done by certain times. So it was with that context then that I went and did my Nuffield scholarship. So my topic was looking at how do you manage 25 similar but different dairy farming operations. And if any of you get a chance, unfortunately, the company became private, and so a lot of the photos and information that was on the website about VDL have now disappeared, or at least they're not being re-added. But VDL was one of the, and I think it is now, the only Royal Charter company that's still operating on its same land. So for those of you from different countries, back in the 1820s, the King of England was handing out royal charters to groups or organisations or companies who were then given pieces of the then Commonwealth. So some of you will have heard of the Hudson Bay Company in Canada, US Canada. They were given a royal charter to go and have a piece of land. And the Van Diemen's Land Company was set up with, at the time, was what was called a court of directors. And it also had a governor rather than a CEO. And those were that was the language used at the time. So VDL, all of the farms that VDL had were in about I could drive between them all within about an hour and a half from one end to the other. But the real thing that I wanted to understand was how to bring all that together. And so as part of my scholarship, I traveled to the United States on two very good occasions, one in California and one up in the Northeast. And I traveled here to China, where there are large corporate dairy farms, actually bigger businesses than in the US, and also to New Zealand for organisations such as Dairy Holdings that has, I think, well, when I was there, I think it had 45 farms. I think now it's got 60. And those guys also use some of the similar systems that we've implemented at VDL. So really, out of my Nuffield scholarship, it was really about risk management and decision making and centralised information gathering. But as part of my scholarship, particularly as part of my Contemporary Scholars Conference and travelling as part of my GFP, it really became apparent to me that in the same way that we'd heard about the term of peak oil in the 1980s and 90s, the world was heading towards peak water. And definitely as we hear stories about South Africa, parts of India, and here in China, there are areas here now that just don't have enough water to be able to sustain the agriculture that it provides. And it definitely highlights the importance and security of water, not just for drinking, but for livestock and also for growing crops. So they were some of the things that I took from my scholarship. I'll now ask if Jodie, if she could bring up the presentation that I have and flick to the second slide, and I'll explain what I'm doing now. So in 2015, I think I was a 2014 scholar, and in 2015 or in late 2014, I was approached to be involved in setting up some dairy farms that were jointly owned by Fonterra from New Zealand and Abbott Laboratories from the United States. Just for context, Abbott are a global pharmaceutical company, and about 1/3 of their products are nutrition. And Fonterra and Abbott have had a long-standing relationship whereby Abbott buys basically animal whey proteins from Fonterra that are used in anything from products that are used for true palliative care type products, right through to infant formula, and then different, as it's now being developed, different age and stage of human life supplements. So that was the context for the joint venture that I head up. Fonterra already had farms in China, and what it was set up was almost like a franchise model that Fonterra had two of their own, what they call hubs, and a hub basically had 16,000 dairy cows. And they also then had a central management office in Beijing that would provide some of that corporate back office, do a lot of that sort of analysis between different farms to say, you know, why are the farms in this area doing better than the farms in that area? And also the corporate services of things like finance and legal and so on and so forth. So we were set up as the third hub, or the JV hub. And in 2015, we looked for the land. And then in early 2016, we selected the land and we ended up here in Shandong province. And Shandong is, if you were to look at a map of China and throw a dart at it, you'd probably hit Shandong. It's pretty much in the middle. It contains the bit that sticks out towards South Korea. And it's a very agriculturally productive province. It has 100 million people. And it's in the top 5 or 6 for nearly every agricultural product, whether it's wheat, whether it's corn, whether it's dairy, whether it's pork, whether it's poultry. There's a lot of it here in Shandong. So Shandong has an excellent history of agriculture. So we built our first farm. We started building it at the start of 2016. It was completed by about October, November of 2016, where our cows who set sail from New Zealand had a little trip up here, and then they started calving in December. And then in 2017, we built our second farm, and what you can see on the screen there is the farm. So just to give you some context, those buildings at the front, there's a big long building. That's where we have about 120 people live. The bigger rectangular building is the mess, or where people have a restaurant, and there's games rooms and TV rooms in there as well. One of those other buildings is the office, and then the building in the right-hand corner closest to the silage bunker, that's the manager's dormitory, and that's where I live, and I have a room on both farms. So that's the farm. The farm is designed around having 3,333 milking cows, which is basically 10/12 of 4,000 cows. They are divided into pens of 375 cows, with beds in each barn of about 342. Cows are milked either 3 times a day or 4 times a day, and the aim is to have a flat calving curve. And on our first farm, we're pretty much there, and on our second farm, we're heading towards that. All of those buildings you see on the far west side, they're for young stock, and yeah, so that's the farm. Can you turn down just 1 second? Could you turn down the fan? The fan? No, jigger. No. Jigger. Yeah, should have. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is how our business is structured. At the base there, we have our, just a quick question there about floods. We are unaffected. The floods are actually Wuhan and south. So they are about 800 kilometres south of us. So our business is obviously based on assets, and those being our physical assets, including our cows. Then on top of that, we have, and here in China, and in fact tonight I'm going to go and have dinner with our key government official. Despite all the stories you hear, these guys, particularly in Shandong, are here to make our life easy and facilitate what can be, but really isn't that complicated, ways of getting approvals and land grants and so on and so forth. So an absolute core function of our business is our external and government relations. FSQ stands for Food Safety and Quality, and then we have environment as one of our pillars, health and safety, and then our laboratory, and then of course our people managers. So I have managers for most of those boxes, even though some of the boxes are overlapping. So I have a health and safety, environment, food safety manager. I have a HR or people manager. I have an external relations and government relations manager. I have an asset manager who also runs wastewater and all the canteens and security. And then I've got farm managers on each of the dairy farms, and then a cropping manager. So in addition to our dairy farms, we also have about 5,000 acres of crop, which is 32,000 mu. Mu is the Chinese measure for land, and a mu is 666 square meters. And a third of that land is under pivots. whereby we use the treated wastewater mixed 50-50 with underground well water to irrigate. We double crop. We grow wheat in the winter and corn in the summer. We have, for the last 4 years, played with different crops, but unfortunately we just cannot get the returns. We can't get the yields and the financial returns to beat corn and wheat. We've tried everything, including different varieties of sorghum, both for forage and for grains. We've tried wheat, oats, barley, triticale. We also grow a small amount of lucerne, alfalfa. This year we're growing soybeans. And as you can tell, you can grow anything here. It's wonderful. It's just such a good place to grow crops. If we could go to the next slide.
Did that go to the next slide?
Yes, please.
Sorry, it didn't do what it was told. There you go.
So what I'd just like to share with you now is a bit of our journey. So in 2018, these were our priorities. So really our challenge was to improve the health and safety culture. And it doesn't matter where you are, but particularly in a second or third world country, your health and safety standards are very, very low. And unfortunately, we've never had any employees.
I've messaged Paul, so we'll just see if we can get him back. He might have to dial back in again. Hello, Paul. No, I can hear some feedback on your line, but I can't hear you. Okay, thank you. So we had a bit of trouble with Paul's connection before we started the webinar, but should be right. Fingers crossed. He'll be able to rejoin us. So please, if you think of any questions as we're going along, put them in the chat and we can get to them as our speakers are going through. And we did start a little bit late, so my sense is we'll be going after 8 o'clock, but hopefully not too far past 8. So for those of you that aren't aware, some of you would have heard Paul at the beginning. He's just coming back on, I think. Is that you, Paul? Paul is one of the hosts of the GFP groups that go through China. So Paul and his staff have been able to host the GFPs there for the last 3 or 4 years, I think, from memory. Paul, have we got you? No, can't hear you yet. So when Paul was trying to dial into the Zoom number that came up on his webinar invitation, the Zoom number in China has been disconnected. So he had to dial in through Hong Kong, which did work, but maybe that's one of the reasons he can't get back on. He's searching for another number to be able to call through. Okay, so we'll come back to Paul, hopefully. He's just having too much trouble there. So David, we're going to go to you. So I'll turn on your video for you. So David, we can't see you yet. You have to accept. There we go. Thank you. Thanks, David. I'll hand it over to you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you're fine.
Can you hear me, Jodie?
I can. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. Right, so for those of you who think, yes, he's got a funny accent for an Australian, I'm obviously British, as it said. So I'm a UK Nuffield 2000 Terrain Scholar. So just over 20 years ago, April, I was awarded my scholarship and emigrated to Australia in 2007. But anyway, so where do I come from? My family's dairy farming stock on both sides. My parents, mother and father, were both dairy farmers' sons and daughters, both out of Shropshire in the middle of England, I suppose you would say. So I don't know how many people know the UK. And then they moved to, or my mother's father actually set up my mother and her sister and her husband. So he was a very successful farmer. My mother's father, having started from next to nothing, and they bought a property at Manor Farm, Byrd. And don't worry, Manor Farm is the name of about half the farms in the UK, so it doesn't really indicate anything other than perhaps it's the farm for the manor, which was 108 acres, which is a small paddock here in Australia. So I was born there, as my two sisters were as well. We were born at home. So I went to the local primary school, and then I went to secondary school in Nantwich, Cheshire, which stands for cheese. And Nantwich was the most important salt town in Elizabeth I's time, with a population the UK or England had the same as New Zealand now. So I went from there. I went to Harper Adams, and I think I'm aware there's at least 3 from my year at Harper who are Nuffield scholars, not all the same year. I think I'm the middle one of the 3 that there was 400 of us when I was at Harper. Harper is now a university. It was a college when I was there, and there's over 5,000 people at Harper. I think it's one of the best agricultural institutions in the UK, if not now. So promote the message. So after Harper, I got very involved in young farmers in Cheshire. Cheshire Federation is totally different from the National Federation in the UK. We had 12 clubs and 2,000 members. Cheshire is a very intensive dairy county. It was 1,000 dairy farms, perhaps the second or third biggest dairy county in the UK, after perhaps Devon and Cumbria, perhaps less so now. So I progressed all the way from chairman of local to chairman of the Cheshire Federation back in 1992, so a while ago, and that gave me the confidence to stand up in front of people. And my father's brother was very political, Byrd. Byrd is B-Y-R-D. There was Byrd's the supergroup America in the 60s, actually, with Mr. Tambourine Man. There's not many of us around, actually, so we like to keep the spelling correct. And he suggested I perhaps should do it in Nuffield when I was in my 20s. And I didn't really get it until after I got married, actually. So I was very young. I was perhaps one of the youngest, but certainly the youngest ever chairman of a local branch, and certainly ever, I mean, I'm talking 20 odd years of the local dairy organisation. Well, so and on the back of that, that's where I applied for Nuffield. I applied 3 times, I was unsuccessful twice. And it was Dr. John Alliston, who's the principal at Cirencester, the big competitor of Harper Adams. They encouraged me, and John Alvis as well, the cheesemakers, going. And Actually, I bought my parents out in 1999. They were 67% of the farm or business. I was 4, my mother 33, and I was 33. And they retired, so I took the year in the UK application and interviews in London, Nuffield. Because Nuffield is obviously as well as agriculture. So I was interviewed in the April, and I was awarded my scholarship in the April. And also that year, Alice, my second daughter, was born in the March, just beforehand. I was done in economics and history with the Open University in the UK as well. On the back of being a farmer, I was awarded that scholarship as well. So I had a baby, my Nuffield scholarship, and I got mine. Yes, where do we go from? Well, we decided to my business manager, medical education skills, and I'm pretty organised, but she's very organised. I've got family, because she's private bookkeeping, who moved, and we organised to go to Australia. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can, David.
Okay.
Keep going, David.
Sorry. Went to Australia and New Zealand in February 2001. Okay, we flew here. It's obviously over 24 hours travel. We woke up in Melbourne. Do we stay or do we go back? I'd organised late, obviously, built the cows. We were up to 150 there, and 100 plus relief milk. We were milking 3 times a day as well, so that was all sorted. And we were busy supplying Muller, the German factory, who had a factory at Market Drayton about Shropshire, be 15 kilometres. And their milk buyer was very good, supportive, and we decided to stay because my parents got mouth in 1967 and were wiped out. I'm 59, so I was 6 and worry about it. And actually, if you look at Dairy Australia's Biosecurity DVD or video, it's mostly set on our farm here, actually, with some of my experiences. So those of you who haven't seen me or won't see me tonight, if you have a look at that, it's there. I think 90% of that video was set here and New Zealand, as far as Brisbane and back down to Timboom in the southwest Victoria, and across to North South Island, New Zealand. My wife and children both came with me. Okay. Sam, Chloe, and Alice. So we were together for about 2 weeks, and she had a week in New Zealand without me, and then I was here for another 2 weeks. They flew back UK after 3 weeks from New Zealand, and I flew out to Melbourne after 5 in Australia, and Swan Hill to Brisbane, Terrier Hare. I went to Mott's, Mulcahy's. Peter Knockman was very good. Max Gelbart, we spent a night at Max's, and it's very sad to hear his death and his wife. death, and we met who was the chairman of Nuffield, Australia at the time, as well. So that was all good. Coming back to the UK, my man had resigned. So I flew into Heathrow, caught the train up from Heathrow up to Crewe. Wife and daughters collected me from the railway station. My man had of not being able to move off the property if we got foot and mouth. So he'd resigned, but and he did his last milk in the morning. I flew back in. I milked that night when I got off the train at Crewe. My part-time man had left. He'd fallen out with my full-time man, and we got notice left. Anyway, to cut a short story, we sorted it, and I got a pregnant wife as well. Okay, anyway, we didn't get foot and mouth. We got within, we lost the baby, unfortunately, and we lost another one. Stress was unbelievable. I had friends who lost it. You've seen the fires, the funeral pyres of dead cattle, close friends that were fastened on the farms. And it reminds me a lot of the virus at the moment, the isolation, the waiting game. Are you going to get it or are you not going to get it? And, the people who did get it, the kids couldn't go to school, it was dropped off at the end of the drive. So, yes, biosecurity is something I'm very passionate about, as well as farmer health. Although coming to Australia in 2001 opened our eyes about emigration, but further to my Nuffield study, we didn't have the big get-togethers like you do nowadays. When we did the scholarship, we had a week to Y College, and we went to Brussels, and that was it. And then it was technically, you were away for about 8 weeks on your study. So I was supposed to go to Europe in 2001. But Europe did not want me because obviously of perhaps bringing foot-and-mouth disease with me. As a result, I completed my study in 2002 with doing my presentation later on that year. I know of at least one of my cohort got caught out by 9/11 in September 2001. So I remember seeing the plane going into the second tower on TV at the time live. So yes, we thought, so I completed my study in 2002. I went to North Denmark, Germany and Holland. We thought about things differently, and we were land tight where we were. We had a lot of big neighbours, and if I didn't want to milk cows by myself for the rest of my life, or if I wanted to stay as a dairy farmer, and we're also concerned about the local education system as well for the girls. So we looked at emigration, but on the back of that, we decided to come and have a look at Western Australia, which we did for 3 weeks, because they were encouraging farmers to emigrate from the UK to WA. And Harry Perkins was very, very good. And he was in touch with us all the time. And we actually got invited to his boardroom. The girls drew all over his carpet. He did provide some paper for it, but he kept in touch with us. And again, it was a shock to learn of his death while we were back in the UK. So yes, we thought of emigration scale. We looked at South Dakota. The Americans wanted people to go to South Dakota to farm because they've got all this spare feed, cattle feed from biofuels that they were making, but Americans didn't want to go to South Dakota, so we didn't want to either. So we went through all the emigration process. We used an agent. We had to get health and police checks, and that went pretty well. it was selling the farm that was the problem. It took us about 4 years to sell the farm. So we eventually sold the farm in 2007. But of course, there was 2 minor outbreaks of foot and mouth, or what turned out to be minor, in the UK. And we'd sold the property, but we hadn't sold the cows. So we had it built into the agreement that I could stay for another 6 months. And Sandra and the girls and the dogs and all our stuff was going to Australia because it'd already been booked. Anyway, as it turned out, you could sell your cows privately, which we did. So we all left together. So we arrived in Australia in 2007, November. And we lived in Warrnambool, southwest Australia, southwest Victoria. I'd actually been to the area for 2 weeks in September 2002. And Andrew Alsop, who worked for Peter Notman, was very good in providing me with some contacts. And of course, there was 5 dairy companies in Australia then, because you had Bonlac and you had Nestle, which Fonterra bought out when I was here in 2002, but they both disappeared by the time I got here in 2007. Property was on a bit of a rise. You'd just come out of a drought, and the property was making towards $7,000 an acre around Warrnambool. We didn't buy there, we bought near Hamilton, actually, which is sheep country. But we bought property that had been a dairy farm, but then back into beef and sheep. So we could resurrect it. And Hamilton in southwest Victoria is very well known for its education, its regional education. So the girls went to Hamilton College, and we were very pleased on the whole with the education received there. So we set up here at what we called Weaver Park, 697 acres, as opposed to I had 148 in the UK. So quite a bit of difference, obviously, in scale. We supplied Warrnambool cheese with. They allowed you a bit higher cell counts, because I knew when you're bringing a lot of cows together, you're going to have stress factors, and cell counts tend to be quite high. So we supplied Warrnambool cheese.
5 minutes, David. 5 minutes.
Okay. Right. Okay. So we supplied Warrnambool cheese, and then well, we supplied all the major ones. So when they collapsed the milk price, we supplied Fonterra for years, and then we moved to MG. I sold the farm and the cows just over 2 years ago. It was time to move on, and I think the MG thing, and unfortunately, I divorced the children with me, and a few other to move on. Farming's great, you know, because your kids are outside the door, or you're outside the door for the kids. But when they move from one Sydney, the other one to Melbourne, she has come back, you miss out on that, as well as obviously family and everything. So yes, since then, or before then, I've been very involved with the National Centre for Farmer Health, which is based in Hamilton. And it's something that's always been of concern to me, you know, farmers looking after themselves, especially male farmers. Male farmers have 3 times the suicide risk of female farmers, and 90% of farm injuries are by men. So it's about men looking after themselves. So I was on the advisory board for the National Centre for Farmer Health for 3.5 years until about 9 or 10 months ago. And since then, I'm doing a graduate certificate in agricultural health and medicine, okay, which is based with Deakin Medical School of Deakin University, and with the health service based in Hamilton. And yes, you know, that's where I possibly see some sort of future with myself outside the other things I'm doing. You know, talking to farmers, getting farmers to look after themselves, etc., etc. So yes, it's been an interesting journey, very stressful in the beginning. Let's be honest about it. You know, a few ups and downs on the way, but we're still here. I've got two great girls, both doing medical degrees. Chloe is in Sydney, training to be a midwife, and Alice ultimately wants to be a trauma doctor. So, yes, do I miss the UK? I miss my friends, very much so, but I keep in touch. I've still got my mum. My dad died 3 months after I sold the cows here, so I had time to see him when he was in hospital, and obviously also to go back to his funeral. At the moment with coronavirus, my mum does get very down, can't go and see her, and Chloe was going to go over there. So I'm very lonely at times, and the hearing's not brilliant, but I have two younger sisters who are very good. So yes, you know, has it been the right move? I think on balance, yes, it has been. It's given us space, it's given us opportunity. The distance is a plus and a minus. I wish Chloe was 10 minutes away. But, you know, it's nice to have that space away from people. We went back 6 or 7 years ago as a family, and I don't drink or smoke, but after being on the roads for a day or two, I was seriously thinking of taking both up. You know, the population density is just, you know, it's within, what, 60 miles, 100 kilometres of our property in the UK, you've got the population of Australia. So, you know, Birmingham, Manchester, everywhere. I know other parts of the UK are a bit less dense, but anyway, there you go. So, yes, it's been an interesting journey.
Thank you, David. We are pushing for time now, so I'll stop you there. Paul Mumford, if we can move on to you, and then I believe Paul Niven's going to try and dial back in again. So, David, thank you very much. I'll put you on mute for the moment, but if you wouldn't mind hanging around for questions at the end, that would be great.
How's that, everyone? I'm hoping you can see my screen.
Thanks, Paul.
Yep. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's actually quite a pleasure to come back to Nuffield and help the next generation. So I will try and work my computer here a little bit. So I'm a third generation. Myself and my wife run a family farm here that we essentially now own. We started as employees, leaving high school when we were, you know, young teen. Then worked for my background came from the banking sector before we came home. And then over the next numerous years, we started buying into the family business of 1,000 acres of dryland farming here in Wanron, which is in Gippsland, Victoria. Now, dryland farming is an interesting space because you've got to read the actual climate to actually understand what your business does and functions and how it operates. And we're not blessed to the rolling green hills of Gippsland. We're actually in the rain shadow of rain of Yarram, if anyone knows our area at all. So we actually milk 450 Jersey cows here on the property in our peak spring numbers. in good times we can get to 450, but in bad times, so 2 years ago with the severe drought, down to and try to generate, well, really it became the least loss we could possibly make. That financial year, our business lost $400,000. But with rain, we all know that it can be very, your wins can be as big as your losses, and we essentially made our profits up the following year. I did my Nuffield Scholar in 2010. I was awarded in 2009, and mine was really around animal genomics and how it was being implemented into the Australian dairy industry. Now, genomics at that time was something new, and genomics is moving into every commodity now, whether it's animals or grasses or varieties of grape, apples. The DNA of our products that we actually grow is being sequenced in every industry, really. But dairy was really commanding and leading from the front in this area. And I think some of the footprint of genomics here in Australia was really followed by what happened in the dairy industry. So my report was very new technology back in 2010. Now it's only 10 years ago, but genomics and technology moves so quickly, and as you can understand, that it's probably moved on quite significantly from 10 years ago. But Nuffield did for me opened up the world, and that's what I hope Nuffield's going to do for yourselves. It's going to open your eyes and make you allow you to look at amazing things right around the world. So some of my industry roles that I should probably say, once I did my Nuffield, I put my head down and bum up and got into my business again and made it tick along. But there was always a calling from industry, tapping me on the shoulder, wanting me to join or address particular issues. I was perceived to be somebody knowledgeable that had knowledge about a particular topic. And you too will find this at some point in your life, that people will start tapping you on the shoulder and asking you, what's your opinion? What do you think? What is your solution? So I started my role in advocacy in 2011, becoming a policy for DV here in Victoria. So that has then led on to eventually in 2018, I took on the president of the United Dairyfarmers. Now that also, we are a commodity of the Victorian Farmers Federation here in Victoria. So it also made me a director of the Victorian Farmers Federation, where I sit at the board table and really do risk management and all those board issues, which is quite interesting. It completely got a different hat than advocacy. I also am a national councillor on the Australian Dairyfarmers, and I also hold the chair of the Markets and Trade People Advisory Group at Australian Dairyfarmers. And this really addresses issues like free trade agreements. We've currently just got one over the line in the last month, which was the Indonesian free trade agreement. historically, there's probably been about 8 free trade agreements that Australia have completed since probably the big one, which was the China Free Trade Agreement some years ago now. So I am also on the National Farmers Federation Trade Committee as the ADF representative. So just some of the other interesting things I thought I'd better highlight is that on the state level at state government, I'm on the NLIS Advisory Committee to the state government. I'm also the Victorian Livestock Advisory Committee and the Data Gene Standard Committee, which is around the genomics at Byrd, which is where the data and analysis. The other piece that I haven't put on that slide is that the importance of the Gardner Foundation here in Victoria is that if anyone remembers Big M back in the day, when that product, as well as other products like Rev, there was a whole suite of products. When they were sold by the state government, the state government was going to use those funds to go into consolidated revenue. Now, Jeff Gardner was an advocate for UDV of the day who contracted cancer and died, and his name was used to set up a fund that purely has the funds from the sale of those products vested, and those funds are then distributed to the Victorian dairy industry. Now, I mentioned that because UDV president is a beneficiary of that investment, and that is something in the order of $125 million at the moment. So it's quite significant to Victoria. Trying to get my page to move. Oh, here we go. So some of you may know all about Victoria, but I'll just quickly go over it. You know, there is some 3,000 dairy farms here in Victoria, of which 17,000 odd farmers are employed on farm, and additionally nearly 20,000 workers in industry. So these are mainly the processing sector. Now, Victoria holds 64% of the national milk pool, and Victoria is very instrumental in the national body because of this reason. We command so much of the milk flow here in Australia, but that comes with a few hitches as well. So at our national body level, because we command more than 50% of the milk here in Australia, it doesn't entitle us to 50% or more of the vote at the national level, because that has to come down to a state consensus, which is quite problematic for dairy and advocacy, because we have to make sure that not only Victorians' interest is looked after, but other states. And the two closest states to Victorian milk production would have to be South Australia and Tasmania. So these are just a few quick issues facing dairy here in Australia, and we all know that that dairy commands a lot of media presence for too many years. Now, I'm trying to fix that, but this is essentially one reason why. Our commodities and our farmers are struggling over the last 10 to 15 years, and EBIT is a declining issue over that period. Other issues facing the dairy industry here in Australia is that there is an Australian dairy plan taking place, and it started some 8 years ago. Now, this is to get a holistic approach of advocacy here in Australia and how it should be addressed. So we're trying to make the foundations of the next 20 to 30 years. Now, this is quite to come up with a unified approach. It's not over, but the idea is to try and align advocacy and the RD and E sector, like what's happened with APL, or the Australian Pork Limited, some 11 years ago, I believe. Now, this is quite unique, that it is very unusual to join advocacy and your research and development of your industry together. And this is where the Australian dairy industry is right at the moment. Now, we're at the design and engagement phase of what the industry may look like. Now, this design and engagement phase is still unknown, but within the next week, we should be seeing new information. So no doubt you'll be hearing all that over here. Some of the other major issues there I've got up there, and they're probably really no-brainers. You know, sustainability, climate issues, consumer engagement. They're happening at all different commodities. I don't think it's special in that regard. Now, I've thrown this in for the declining EBIT. You know, this one here is, I think I've got a message. Yep, sorry, I'm just this one is really one of the issues of Northern Victoria, and this is how the drought and water influences are really affecting the dairy sector in that part of the world. The other interesting piece there is the two circles on the bottom of the screen, the left and the right. Now, if you look at the left where the cow is, the majority of that circle there is the light green. That used to represent, back in 2005, 2006, that was the main source of diet in a cow's system, which was grass. However, if you move to the right in 2018-19, the feed intake of the broader cows in the northern irrigation area has really changed, and we're seeing a transitional shift to housed cows or TMR systems in the northern irrigation district of Victoria. So the industry is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. Just on that note, that if you draw a line horizontally across Victoria and take out the northern irrigation system, the bottom half is essentially rain-based, grass-based feed systems. So we're creating two different feed systems here in Victoria. And again, this is just to emphasise climate change. I don't think you know, you need to be preached about that. And consumers, you know, there's a great quote there from Alana Brennan. You know, dairy farmers don't want a grant; they just want a right to trade and free marketplace. So, advocacy is quite a challenging role, and essentially, I feel that I fell into the role that I was the last man standing, and no one else wanted the job. But I actually love it. It created a change of, I don't know, lifestyle for myself. You know, I can no longer physically farm, so I've now got employees here on the farm. My wife and I are getting a little bit too old and weary, and we can't handle the rigours. So the challenge for me is quite real for advocacy. And it needs a special type of person to actually do it. Now, I don't know whether I've got those traits, but you've got to listen to people. You've also got to have an opinion, and you've got to listen and actually speak for your members and your farmers. But there's a lot of issues there that we need to address, you know, social issues and economic issues. The influences of government that have on policy, you know, it may be a social or economic issue, but you may have a government that is totally left-wing or totally right-wing, which is against your policy. So, you know, Nuffield is a network of people, so use its power. And Nuffield will open doors that are totally unimaginable to you. You know, some of my Nuffield doors that were opened was, you know, the House of Lords in London, and we went into the Queen's chambers where she has all the knights. You know, I've been into the White House. I've done totally amazing things and met amazing people like Hailey Berry in Beijing, and it is gobsmacking what you'll actually see and do on your travels. So, you know, absorb it all. It's just an amazing experience. But more importantly, why are you a Nuffield scholar? And what will your legacy be, not to your own business and your own, but your industry? But more importantly, Australian ag. Australian ag is looking at, has got substantial targets here in Australia over the next few years. And are you going to be a part of that? And how are you actually going to add to that? Now, my wife is outside there and she'll kill me for this, but I thought I'd better throw it in because that's what partners do. This is my wife and I. And finally, that's the rest of my family and their partners. So on that note, I will leave it at that, Jodie. I can't see any questions. I don't know whether I've pushed the right thing.
Thank you, Paul. We did have one question come through there from Frank, who's a dairy farmer, I believe, in the Netherlands. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. Why is the milk production not increased by using grains? Was his question, going back to your slide there of the different systems.
So it's actually farm losses that is creating lots of milk flow here. So it's the number of farms that are leaving the industry that is decreasing milk volume. I think, is that the question, Jodie?
Yeah, that's right.
I can't see my message. Yeah, so per cow production is constantly increasing for animal nutrition, genomics, feed systems, feed management. So it's not the loss of cow per litre that's being lost, it's the loss of farms within that district that you're looking at there.
Yeah, thank you. That Frank's just messaged to say, yes, that's clear. And another one from the Netherlands before we will have to wrap up because we're going back to Paul Niven. Paul, can you tell us something about the relationship with the Australian government from your position and roles?
Yes, so the Australian government is very sympathetic to the dairy industry and agriculture, I must say. We have had some very good ag ministers in this very short time. Now, they're all a little bit different, and I do have favourites, but ones they are. One of my big ticket items that I want to challenge yourselves at is that you'll be doing your Nuffield over the next year or so. What is it that's going to help assist Australia's economy come out of some sort of recession? Now, I see there's a huge challenge there for the dairy industry to play a huge part. That we've got the data, we've got the intelligence. I've just got to help make it happen. But you know, I'll throw it out to the scholars out there. You know, what do you do? How's that, Jodie?
Thank you, Paul. Sorry, I forget to mute myself sometimes. That's excellent. Thank you. Now, Paul Niven, I believe you are on the line again. So
I am. Can you hear me, Jodie?
I can. Hello again.
Hello again. Very good. Well, look, thank you. And firstly, thank you to David and to Paul, who've really given some very, I suppose, detailed and also very inspiring things for us all to think about. I think now what I'd like to do is share with you what's happened here in China for our business with regards to COVID. But I do want to step back, and I do want to sort of, I suppose, reflect on Jody and Nicola's assembly of us this evening. You've got David, who shared really quite a personal journey and the challenges of really hitting something like foot and mouth. And then you've got somebody like Paul, who actually, he mentioned the Garden Foundation. I met Paul through the Garden Foundation when they have what they call the Dairyfarmers alumni. And I think you can really hear in Paul's story about how much he is an advocate for farming, for dairy, for Australian farming. I think that his questions there are ones that you should all know. Or think about and know the questions, and then start thinking and formulating your answers. And the great thing Steve mentioned is that Nuffield will help you open doors. And sometimes you'll end up in good places, sometimes you'll end up in bad places. But the great news, as Paul again said, is Nuffield's got people everywhere, and there's always somebody there to help you and work through some challenges. So, Ted, I'll tell you about what's probably been the toughest year of my life, and that is, as you're aware, in early March, early January, I started hearing about a new disease that was happening in Wuhan, in China. As you do, just like becoming a member of Nuffield, here there aren't that. And you know a few of them. And one of my friends is a guy called Stephen McDonald, who some of the older ones of you in Australia will know from Foreign Correspondent. He used to be the Beijing-based correspondent for the ABC, and now he works for the BBC. And so you always know something interesting is happening. Stevie starts the WeChat messages, or Stevie starts complaining that it's been shut down. So Stevie was down in Wuhan on about the 10th or the 12th of January, and said things were bad and there were a lot of sick people. Now, not here to hear that the Chinese government was acted very, very quickly, and I think about the 20-something of February, prior to Chinese New Year, they put Wuhan down. What happened between about the 15th and the 25th was that what I will call medical refugees, who were people who could not get medical treatment because the hospitals were full in Wuhan and Hubei, were then moving into neighbouring provinces. And one of those neighbouring provinces, Henan, and Henan is a neighbour to Shandong. And very quickly started seeing on WeChat with Facebook in China, some of my, about maybe 10 or 20 out of our 100 come from Henan province, and their families, or they started posting literally villages with piles of dirt in the middle of the roads to stop people coming from the neighbouring province back to Henan. And the reason was that they knew that there were sick people down there, and they didn't want them to come into their communities. So just prior to Chinese New Year, I sat my team down and said, guys, I don't know what's going on, but this isn't going to be good. And I encouraged them all to be very careful where they travel. And part of our team, we had 2 members who actually come from Wuhan or surrounding areas, 2 veterinarians. And we actually had the son of one of our employees who was studying at university in Wuhan. And prior to Chinese New Year, and for those of you who aren't that familiar with Chinese New Year, just call it Christmas for the Chinese. So everybody comes home from wherever they've been, and they come home and see grandma. So China worked out that it was on a really tight line, because everybody was going to come home from everywhere else, having been on trains or planes with other people, they're all going to go and see grandma and grandpa. And this thing was killing people in Wuhan, and we didn't really know what it was. Then we needed to act. Restaurants closed, everything stopped. Usually milk, usually UHT milk in gift is given as a big gift over the Chinese period from grandparents to children and friends to other friends. Milk UHT stopped. All of the restaurant closed. There was no more beer manufactured. Every restaurant had its pre-Christmas order of beer, and then nobody came to the pub. So what I very quickly worked out was that going on, it was very disadvantaged for China being first, was we didn't know what was going to come next. So after watching this and over Chinese New Year, I actually locked both of our farms down. Some had about 130 people, the other farm had about 120 people. No people in, no people out. And there were a small number who came in, such as one of my back, and the health and safety manager came back, and one of my other operations managers came back. And then they did 14 days quarantine on the farm. On our farms, work with masks, and for some of our tasks, we wear face shields or glasses. So I wasn't actually worried about infection within the farm. And just like David mentioned, I have a background as a veterinarian. Biosecurity was key. So instead of worrying about getting foot and mouth in my farm, I was worried about getting COVID into my dormitory, where we have 4 and 6 people sleep in a room. And as we've seen from particularly Singapore, the virus can quickly move through. So as a business and as a formal, we're the subsidiary of 2 very large international companies. And as a large company, we have 2 key processes. Our first one is what we call our ERP, our Emergency Response Plan. And the second one is what we call our BCP, our Business Continuity Plan. Now, of course, we don't have one that says COVID. But what we do have is within our business continuity plan, we have plans for when milk needs to be moved off the farm and there's travel restrictions. And we have those every year with frozen roads or snowstorms and things like that, or as one of the people mentioned before, flooding. So we already have that. And then we also have BCP plans when we can't buy different feeds. So for the first couple of days, one of my health and safety supervisors was going to the Transport Bureau every day trying to get permits for getting milk trucked out. So that was what we called being agile, not necessarily working in your core function. And then after that, it was an ever-rolling challenge around which feed stuff was going to be next. We worry about. We always increase our inventories for Chinese New Year, so we were okay. But as I mentioned before, beer, and we feed brewers grain on the farm, it was the last item to come back online. And it was because the whole of the hospitality sector was closed for 6 weeks. It was closed for all of February and it was closed all of March. Then they had to drink all the beer that was already in the supply chain. So our fresh brewers grain really didn't come in until later on. So I was the whole time changing rations, adjusting, etc., etc. So by the middle of March, we started opening up, and then we've opened up more and more since. And then, of course, and my personal, I wasn't able to travel to the different places where I normally travel, which is all cool. But in May, I was then able to travel back to Beijing. And then there was the recurrence, which was the Xinfadi seafood market. And so since then, I haven't been able to travel back to Beijing. We have had no visitors. Usually we have either suppliers or nutritionalists all come and visit, and that has had a material impact on the support we can provide to our staff, but we do a lot of it now remotely like this. And again, we've had no Nuffield. We usually take university students from the City University in Hong Kong every year to come and see a dairy farm. They have not been. So it's disrupted our business, but as a core function, our business has been unaffected. And that is, if I leave you with 2 messages, it's whatever the crisis, you've got to be agile. And then the second thing is you've just got to make decisions with the information that you have. You have all the information. So Oliver and I appreciate I've gone well, but everybody who's dialed in to hear a little story from us.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. I'm just turning on the video from our other two speakers. We have had some questions come in, but I think given the time, what would be the best thing for me to do is make sure that I send the contact details of our three speakers to the attendees to our webinar tonight. And by way of wrap up, of course, I would like to thank you all for coming on. And I think, to me, what it's shown is Nuffield is very much an experiential leadership journey. You are learning to be leaders by experiencing things. And even though none of us are travelling in 2020, we are still all learning. And you are already, those 2020 scholars that are on the line are already learning by experience, because this is absolutely a learning experience, being involved in COVID. And we've heard, you know, the different experiences that our three scholars have had through their Nuffield journey, and what they're doing now in their lives, whether it's advocacy or farmer health, or, you know, working on the other side of the world with some challenges that are quite different to some of our day-to-day challenges. So again, thank you very much for everyone for dialing in, and thank you for those that have been able to stay on the line, which most of you have, fortunately. We will be sending out a post-webinar survey, which we always do, so please look out for that in your inbox. And our next in our series will be in a month's time, last Wednesday of the month at this time zone, 7 p.m. in Australia, and whatever other time zone you are in around the world. So I'll leave it there. Can I again say thank you to our panelists, David, Paul and Paul, and thank you to our attendees, our 2020 scholars and our country executives and other alumni who've been able to join us tonight. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, everybody. Thanks.